Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories. If you were in my husband's position, seeking solace in the arms of another, what would you do? I'd love to hear your thoughts. As for me, an undeniable connection started to develop between a coworker and myself as this post comes to an end. Despite the tediousness of office life, we couldn't deny our growing feelings for each other. Our lives kept intertwining, igniting a spark between us, which eventually led to a fire. The harmless exchanges we had turned into hidden looks, drawn-out conversations, and sneaky opportunities for closeness. Our connection grew stronger with each passing week, and the forbidden nature of our relationship only fueled our attraction to each other. Whenever we needed a break from the monotony of our daily lives, we found solace in each other's company. It was the perfect antidote to our routines. The boundaries between friendship and a more intimate connection became hazy, and we both willingly succumbed to the irresistible allure of passion. Keeping our relationship under wraps became the tie that bound us. It was an exhilarating yet nerve-wracking game that evoked equal measures of thrill and anxiety. Sneaking around to steal kisses in private nooks, and rendezvousing without anyone's knowledge under the guise of work obligations fueled the passion of our taboo romance, which was amplified by our physical connection. We deluded ourselves into feeling indestructible, believing that our furtive affair could persist covertly within the confines of our workplace. The day my cheating partner's spouse showed up at our doorstep and broke the news to my husband was a nightmare. Until then, I had convinced myself that my affair was solid and that my husband would never find out. But the repercussions of my choices caught up with me, and the weight of my guilt and remorse left me feeling powerless. The life I had meticulously built was now on the brink of collapse due to my actions. The day of the tragedy started off no differently than any other typical workday. It was a Friday, and as I bid farewell to my husband with a hug and a kiss, I was completely unaware that the facade of our flawless marriage that I had meticulously crafted was on the verge of being obliterated. I had been so consumed with the demands of my job and going through the motions of my day that I hadn't even noticed the brewing storm that was rapidly approaching. My husband was relishing his day off by indulging in his favorite pastime of playing video games on his PlayStation 5. Little did he know that an unfamiliar person was about to enter our lives, carrying with them the weight of a truth that would completely upend everything. The tranquility of our home was abruptly interrupted by the jarring sound of the doorbell. My husband had no inkling that anything out of the ordinary was about to occur. When he opened the door, however, he was immediately taken aback by the sight of a woman he had never met before. She introduced herself as the wife of a man I was having an affair with at my workplace. As she divulged the heartbreaking truth that had been shrouded in secrecy, my husband was left reeling. The gravity of her words hung thick in the air for what felt like an eternity. She inadvertently revealed that her spouse and I had been engaged in an affair. Our betrayal had been ongoing for a significant period of time. She disclosed that she had discovered our transgressions 6 months prior and had confronted her spouse about the affair. She had believed that the affair had ended after their conversation. However, our desires had overridden any sense of morality, and we had resumed our covert liaison. She had reached out to me in a last-ditch effort to salvage her marriage. She cautioned me to steer clear of her partner in case she revealed everything to my spouse. However, my arrogance and the allure of our forbidden liaison clouded my judgment, and I brushed off her warnings as idle threats. I convinced myself that our affair could continue without any adverse consequences. But as the truth started to unravel, the foundations of my life began to crumble around me. My husband, who had been blissfully unaware of my affair with another man, was now confronted with a reality that he had never expected. In days of disbelief and heartbreak, he made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of our lives. He left a note before vacating our shared home and sought solace in an Airbnb and the guidance of a lawyer. The betrayal had inflicted immense anguish upon him, and he resolved to terminate our marriage and sever all ties that had once bound us. The initiation of the divorce proceedings reinforced the irreversible damage that I had inflicted. My husband was consumed with fury and the need for retribution, refusing to keep the affair confined to our marriage even after it had been exposed. The betrayal had contaminated not only my personal life but also the workplace where the affair had originated. My husband, driven by a blend of justified fury and injured ego, devised a strategy to reveal the affair to the very people who had inadvertently facilitated it. He resolved to confront those who had aided the affair, his voice brimming with resolute determination as he dialed the number of the workplace where I was employed. But as soon as the call was answered, he was overcome with conflicting emotions. He felt both fear and determination, knowing that speaking the truth would have a profound impact on the people involved. As the silence on the other end of the phone grew, his inner turmoil intensified. Nevertheless, my husband remained composed as he revealed the heartbreaking truth to the unsuspecting individuals at his wife's former workplace. He delved deep into the situation, exposing the falsehoods and dishonesty that had occurred within our professional environment. His words poured out like sharp fragments of shattered trust, leaving no room for ambiguity or misinterpretation. The consequences were immediate as the hallways buzzed with hushed conversations and glances that held a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and disdain towards the subject at hand. It didn't take long for us to realize that the individuals who had previously been held in high regard were now facing severe damage to their reputations and careers. The consequences of our actions were immediate and far-reaching. The revelation of my private encounter with the other man not only stained my personal reputation but also had serious implications for my professional life, intensifying the already overwhelming sense of misery. The repercussions of my choices reverberated throughout every aspect of my existence. As a direct and indirect outcome, I was left to bear the full burden of my transgressions alone, consumed by a profound sense of isolation and despair. When the man with whom I had been involved at work withdrew and sought comfort in his own marriage, I was left with nothing but the haunting echoes of remorse and regret. Standing amidst the wreckage of my shattered life, I had no option but to come to terms with this harsh reality. The price I paid for my self-centered actions was exceedingly high, encompassing the loss of my husband's love, the disintegration of our marriage, the besmirching of my reputation, and the excruciating turmoil that stemmed from my affair. As I witnessed the devastation wrought by my egocentric desires, I was overwhelmed by regret. I had gambled with love, and the stakes had been too high. The price I paid for my actions was exorbitant. The consequences of my choices would haunt me for the rest of my life, serving as a perpetual reminder of the pain I inflicted on those I held dear. Ultimately, the affair not only shattered the trust between my husband and me but also triggered a significant shift in workplace dynamics. The repercussions of our actions extended far beyond our personal lives. Consequently, I became irrelevant and was left with a trail of broken relationships in my way. Thank you for listening to this story. Now here is another exciting story for you to read. I was in a relationship with this girl for almost 7 years, and we shared a living space for 6 of those years. My career involved electronic consulting, which entailed configuring systems with a plethora of sensors. Although it was lucrative, it demanded extensive travel. This is just to provide context. At some point, I had a hunch that something was amiss. I couldn't pinpoint it, but my intuition told me so. I usually trust my instincts, therefore, I resolved to substantiate my suspicion. While she was away, I discreetly positioned a tiny sound-activated recorder in every room of our condominium. Since the storage was on my office computer, the device was incredibly small. I executed this plan on a Friday afternoon, spent the weekend with her, and had a pleasant time. However, on Sunday night, I retrieved my luggage and tools, placed a GPS tracker in my car, and departed. The following morning, she left in her car, and I departed for my next work site. The initial plan was to be away for a fortnight. During the first week, I conversed with her every day. However, during the second week, she was frequently absent when I called, despite it being the time she typically stayed at home. When I inquired about it, she provided several excuses, such as work meetings, delayed dinners, and assisting her brother. Upon the conclusion of the 2-week period, I returned home and promptly proceeded to my office. Upon reviewing the recordings, I noticed a significant amount of activity during the first week but very little during the second, except for a loud vehicle passing by. As a result, I decided to revisit the first week's recordings, and to my surprise, I discovered that she was conversing with another man. To make matters worse, she had the conversation on speaker mode, allowing me to hear both sides of the exchange. It turns out that she had been engaging in infidelity from the early days of our relationship. Upon discovering this, I concluded that revenge was in order. My first task was to identify the individual with whom she was having an affair. After conducting some sleuthing, I uncovered that she had met this guy and his spouse and family at a campground where she had been employed before we crossed paths. I then determined where they resided and probed phone records. Since this was a few years ago, people still had landlines, so I searched for the number. The number was listed, which was fantastic. I dialed the number, and a man answered. I was ready for this, so I asked to speak with Mrs. Smith in a professional tone. He shouted for her, and she came on the line. I inquired if she was aware of my soon-to-be ex-girlfriend. She responded affirmatively, stating that they had invited her over to their residence a few times after meeting her at the campground. That was news to me, and I was taken aback. I informed her that we couldn't discuss the matter in detail at that moment, but if she could contact me when it was convenient, I would provide her with a comprehensive explanation. I shared my cell phone number with her and hoped that she would call back. As anticipated, she contacted me 2 days later. I narrated everything that I had recorded to her, and she was initially incredulous. I assured her that I would duplicate the recording and forward it to her. Although she agreed, she remained doubtful. I had my work cut out for me. I headed over to a nearby recording studio with all the files and briefed them on my requirements. They merged all the distinct recordings together so when she moved around the house, the conversation was complete. Subsequently, they burned these audio recordings onto CDs. It required 5 CDs to cover the entire conversation. However, I didn't send these CDs to Mrs. Smith. I mailed the CDs to her via registered mail and waited. After about 10 days, she contacted me. She appeared composed and informed me that she had filed for divorce the previous day. Her husband worked on an oil rig and was away for the next 2 weeks. She had listened to the CDs that I had sent her and handed them over to her attorney. Over the years, the woman's husband had amassed a significant fortune through his work, allowing them to acquire various luxuries such as plots of land for camping, a boat, and an RV. However, she was adamant about receiving half of it all. After ending the call, the speaker couldn't help but chuckle to themselves. They had heard some unsavory things on recordings and felt that the husband deserved what was coming to him. Despite this, they never led onto the girlfriend and maintained a normal demeanor throughout. Despite my doubts, I decided to leave a tracker on her car for the next week. Nothing eventful happened, however, chaos ensued soon after. My girlfriend seemed lost and aimless, wandering around the house. When I inquired about her behavior, she told me that a friend of hers was going through a divorce. Although I expressed my sympathies, I continued with my day. Later that evening, I observed her conversing with someone on the phone while sitting on the deck. I wasn't paying much attention, but I did notice her voice getting louder during the phone call. When it ended, she immediately went into the bedroom. I heard her rustling around and became curious, so I walked over to the door. She was packing clothes into suitcases. I asked her what she was doing, but she didn't respond. After finishing her packing, she went out to her car and left without saying a word. After 2 weeks of radio silence from my girlfriend, Mrs. Smith called me to provide an update. She had served her husband with divorce papers citing infidelity as the cause. Predictably, he denied the allegations, but Mrs. Smith was able to provide specific details that stopped him in his tracks. She also confirmed that the phone call my girlfriend had on the night she left was with her. Although Mrs. Smith denied raising her voice, there was clearly more to the story. Despite my ex-girlfriend's insistence that nothing happened, she eventually let slip some details that confirmed her guilt. To my girlfriend, she implied that she had discovered the truth on her own and was planning to tell me next. This revelation explained why my girlfriend had left so abruptly. As a result, I took action by canceling her credit card and initiating the repossession of her car. I arranged for the utilities to be shut off and canceled her insurance. All of her belongings that were left behind were sent to her father's house via movers, along with a note explaining the reason for her sudden departure. Her father lived 2 states away, which made the situation even more complicated. Since we lived in a condo, I arranged for it to be shown for sublease. Within 4 days, I had moved out and settled into a new condo. Located in a gated community that had a card shack, finally, her car was picked up and taken away. They repossessed her car while she was at work. Fortunately, the dealership was willing to work with me and sell the car, and I paid the difference. Mrs. Smith was successful in her divorce proceedings and received her fair share, which Mr. Smith never expected due to his fear of his company finding out about his dirty secrets. As for my ex-girlfriend, I never heard from her again. I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to my loyal listeners and subscribers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for listening to this story. Now here is another exciting story for you to read. I was lounging on the couch with Mark's arms wrapped around me, as we typically sat in his living room. Suddenly, Emmett appeared from the hallway, causing me to fear that my worst nightmare had come true. However, within moments, Mark had shoved me out of his embrace and stood up, revealing that it was not a nightmare after all. Mark had pushed me away upon recognizing his friend and received a punch to the face in return. Emmett then turned to me and confessed, "I've been wanting the courage to remove you from my life and the lives of my children, and today, seeing you in the arms of my best friend, I finally got it." I attempted to chase after Emmett as he stormed out of the house, but he vanished without a trace, and I was unable to catch up with him. Although I knew I was on the brink of a disaster, I wasn't ready to handle it all just yet. Hi, my name is Alex, and I started dating Mark 2 years ago. Before that, I was married to Emmett, who had 2 children from his previous relationship. Emmett was away when I was invited to a crucial party, but he urged me to attend. Attending a party solo, I found myself alone until Mark approached me. Being aware of my relation to his closest pal at the gathering, we quickly hit it off. We enjoyed each other's company, chatting, laughing, and dancing the night away, all while indulging in copious amounts of alcohol. Our connection was so strong that we eventually ended up in the back seat of his car. Despite having crossed paths a few times before, our encounter that night was unlike any other. Believing it to be a singular occurrence, we committed a grave error in judgment that we kept hidden from others. Determined to never repeat it, we went our separate ways after the incident. However, I couldn't shake the feeling of longing for Mark. Even after returning home, instead of remorse over betraying my husband, I found myself seeking out opportunities to see Mark again and again. I anticipated feeling remorseful for my actions towards my husband, however, I did not initially. I thought I could never face my spouse again, but rather, I openly conversed with Emmett about Mark. There was no embarrassment or guilt present in my demeanor. I started meeting Mark in secret, using various excuses, and every time we met, we ended up having passionate encounters. Initially, we were hesitant to indulge in such behavior, but over time, it became our right to pursue happiness. Despite having a lovely life with Emmett, being warmly welcomed by his children, and living in contentment, I couldn't resist seeing Mark. Mark and I became entangled, and my body was consumed by an insatiable desire. I was so consumed by my passion that I failed to realize I was jeopardizing my life. It had been a month since my last encounter with Mark, as Emmett had been home with his children at their request. But after a month of abstinence, I couldn't resist any longer. I made the decision to meet with Mark while the children were at school. I fabricated an excuse to Emmett regarding our children, stating that I had pledged to take them out for some ice cream once they were done with school. Afterward, I departed our residence and headed directly to Mark's. Meanwhile, Emmett was alone at home and decided to pay a visit to his closest companion, also arriving at his abode. Upon noticing my parked vehicle outside his friend's home, he felt confused. In just a few moments, I exited the residence and openly kissed his best pal in front of him. After getting back in my car and driving away, Emmett displayed patience by concealing himself to avoid being found by either of us. By the time he came back, I had already reached home and was there to welcome him with the kids. Though they mentioned having ice cream, he ignored us and headed straight to his home office. I had no idea about the occurrence he had witnessed concerning his company. As days passed by, I couldn't help but notice a shift in his behavior that persisted for almost a week. The more I pondered on it, the more convinced I became that something was amiss. So, I mustered the courage to confront him about it. In retrospect, I realized that I was the one with flaws that clouded my judgment. I had this tendency to project my shortcomings on others and view them through my flawed lenses. Instead of initiating an honest conversation, I impulsively accused him of infidelity, failing to acknowledge my own imperfections. To my surprise, he responded after hearing my accusations. The moment I found myself in the same room as him, I felt an intense urge to leave, and so I stormed out without hesitation. In my mind, I was convinced that the only plausible reason for Emmett's apparent disregard towards me was that he was involved with another woman. This belief was so strong that it clouded my judgment, causing me to remain oblivious to the fact that he had been biding his time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to confront me and remind me of my true position and value. After a whole month of my infidelity, he had finally mustered the courage to throw everything in my face, and I had no choice but to face the consequences of my actions. When he entered Mark's house, he told us that he knew everything and that I was now free to follow my wishes, since he no longer wanted to stay in this marriage. I walked into the house, feeling somewhat apprehensive about Mark's well-being. To my surprise, he informed me that our relationship was over and demanded that I leave his home immediately. I was taken aback by his sudden announcement and attempted to rationalize with him, explaining that this was the perfect opportunity for us to finally embrace our feelings for one another. Unfortunately, Mark was adamant in his decision, claiming that he could never make our relationship official due to the stigma surrounding his previous affair with his best friend's wife. In a desperate attempt to salvage our relationship, I reminded him that he was now with me, but he simply couldn't bear the thought of the harsh reality that came with being with someone who was previously involved in such a scandalous situation. Upon my arrival at home, I was consumed with a profound sense of emotional anguish. My heart wounded and my soul shattered into countless pieces, all due to Mark's refusal. As I attempted to open the gate, I was met with unexpected resistance, and so I resorted to knocking on the door instead. Emmett answered the door and handed me 2 bags without a word. Confused and in disbelief, I stopped him before he could close the door and asked him about the contents of the bags. To my utter shock and dismay, Emmett explained that all of my belongings had been packed up and that I was no longer welcome in the house. Furthermore, he informed me that I was no longer allowed to see his children, effectively severing all ties between us. The weight of this sudden and devastating loss was almost too much to bear. The man callously discarded every single snapshot he had snapped of Mark and me throughout numerous days. Tragically, I lost everything dear to me, my spouse, offspring, abode, and dignity, all due to the overpowering influence of lust. The individual for whom I had been willing to forsake all else has also deserted me, for he is incapable of acknowledging our bond in public. Despite my numerous attempts to contact Emmett, he never bothered to respond to any of my messages, leaving me feeling heartbroken and rejected. Even when I went to the school where our children attended in the hope of catching a glimpse of them, the teachers refused to let me meet them, stating that Emmett had instructed them to avoid me at all costs. The realization that I had been unfaithful to Emmett had dawned on me, but it was too late. Despite spending the last 3 years with those precious children, Emmett does not let me have any contact with them, depriving me of the joy of watching them grow and flourish. It seems as though this is my retribution for not having the opportunity to confess to my wrongdoing or even make amends for my infidelity. As a result, I am left to face the world alone, with the weight of my guilt bearing down on me until my final breath. This is a price that I will have to pay for the rest of my life, as I foolishly took all the blessings in my life for granted. It is a heavy burden to bear, but I must continue on and hope that one day I will be granted the chance to make things right. Until then, I can only hope that this experience will teach me to be more grateful for the love and companionship that I am blessed with in my life. As time passed, I gradually stopped attempting to contact Emmett, as I came to the realization that my lack of gratitude was the root cause of my punishment. It was a difficult pill to swallow, but I eventually accepted my fate. After 2 long years, I stumbled upon Emmett, his children, and an unfamiliar woman at a restaurant, all of them seemingly enjoying a pleasant evening together. I couldn't discern if this woman was Emmett's new love interest or not. As fate would have it, I was working as a waitress at the restaurant at that time. In order to avoid any awkward encounters, I quickly swapped tables with another server and made my exit. It was a painful reminder of what I had lost, but I knew that it was a consequence of my own actions. I want to say to all those who are cheating or are going to cheat on their beloved spouses, don't do it. Stay honest and faithful. Thank you for sticking with us. And now on to the final story. As I picked up my phone, it suddenly began to ring. Before I could even utter a greeting, a voice on the other end informed me that my girlfriend, who I thought was away on business, was actually in bed with her business partner. The call abruptly ended, leaving me stunned. However, my shock was short-lived as the doorbell rang, and I quickly rose to answer it. Upon opening the door, I found no one in sight, but there was an envelope resting on the step. As I began to peel off the tape, I muttered Eva's name under my breath. If this was some sort of prank, it certainly wasn't amusing. The contents of the envelope revealed a photograph of Eva and her business partner in bed, taken from a distance. As someone who works in IT, I knew that they were being spied on. When Eva failed to answer my call, I dialed the number provided in the envelope and was connected to the person responsible for the surveillance. When I asked the person on the phone for their identity, they responded by revealing that they were the wife of the man who appeared in the photographs with my girlfriend. This shocking revelation led me to discover that Eva had been in a relationship with her business partner before meeting me. In an attempt to make him jealous and regret breaking up with her, she began dating me. Learning of her ulterior motives and how she used my love for her to get back at her ex infuriated me beyond measure. I sat down and began to recollect the first encounter I had with Eva. My name is Darren, and I'm 25 years old. It was a year ago when Eva, now 24, and her company required a website. That's when I met her. Eva and her partner were impressed with the website and offered me their entire office contract. Ever since then, I've been handling all their IT needs. I made another attempt to reach out to Eva, and this time she finally answered the call. I asked Eva why she hadn't been answering my calls, and she explained that she was in a meeting. After hearing her response, I professed my longing for her and then ended the call. I powered up my laptop and swiftly sent her a link, which she clicked on moments later. When she clicked on the link, I gained access to the camera on her mobile phone. Unfortunately, what I saw on the other end was something I didn't want to see. Through her phone's camera, I saw Eva lying in bed with a white sheet draped over her, her phone resting in her hand. My mind was in a frenzy because she had just informed me that she was in a meeting, leaving me puzzled about why she was lying in bed without any clothing. Suddenly, her business partner appeared on the screen, kissing her while resting his head on her shoulder. When she inquired about the link, I made a flimsy excuse, claiming it was sent to her by mistake and meant for someone else. She accepted my explanation without any hesitation. My love for her had blinded me to the truth. It dawned on me that I had been blind to her deception throughout our relationship. I resolved that I would no longer be her plaything. The next day when she arrived, it felt like an eternity. I confronted her about her infidelity without bothering to calm myself down. At first, she denied everything, but when I mentioned the camera hack, she let out a sigh and confessed without displaying any remorse. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out of my chest. Despite the pain, I mustered the courage to ask her why she had used me all along. She revealed that I was an easy option to make her ex-boyfriend jealous. At first, it wasn't her intention to use me, but she noticed that he became insecure whenever she talked to me. So, she pretended to have feelings for me, and the day our relationship became official, he begged her to bring him back into her life. There were instances when she felt guilty for exploiting me, but she believed it was crucial to keep him interested in her. I spoke to her about life. Initially, I had strong feelings of love towards you, but since yesterday, I've been feeling angry. Now, I feel sorry for you because you had to feign love for me just to get the attention of your ex-partner. It's one of the worst things that can happen to anyone. She replied, saying that if I wanted to end our relationship, I had her permission to do so. She also mentioned that she never loved me and didn't feel any remorse about it. I believed it was essential at that moment, so I took action. I told her that I wouldn't let her go unpunished. She had to pay for what she had done to me. Afterward, I instructed her to leave my premises. Her infatuation with him was so intense that she didn't even ponder how I found out about their relationship. I endured 2 days of agony, but one thing was clear: I wouldn't let her escape the consequences of her actions. I had forgiven her for any guilt she may have felt about her behavior, but she was determined to make things right to the point where forgiveness was difficult. After pondering for 2 days, I devised a plan that required me to be in her office. Thus, I decided to pay her a visit. When she inquired about my presence, I explained that I had come to retrieve my belongings. I was aware of her merger meeting scheduled for later that afternoon, and I only required a few moments to swap her flash drive with mine. Once I had retrieved my things, I was ready to leave the office, which had figuratively left me empty-handed and contemplating my next move to bring her down. Fate had a different plan in store for me when someone called out my name and requested that I check on a projector issue in a meeting room. I had been seeking an opportunity like this, and finally, it presented itself. Upon entering the room where Eva and he were seated, I took the chance to adjust the projector and replace the flash drive. My true intention was to observe Eva's distress. So, I acted as though I needed them to turn on the projector to test its functionality. These were the pictures that were sent to me along with the ones I captured after hacking into her camera. I kept the pictures I took with the hacked camera in case she denied my accusations. Since she didn't allow me that opportunity, I used those photos to harm her personal and professional life. The entire room, including their maintenance staff and the new merger partners, began to whisper among themselves. It was common knowledge that Eva and I were in a relationship, and everyone was aware that her lover was married. As soon as they saw them in these photos, they started looking at them with a judgmental look. I approached her and explained that I felt it was necessary at the time. Their business associates made an excuse to leave the meeting, and her significant other abruptly departed, declaring their relationship over. I reminded her that I had warned her that using me for her own gain would come at a cost. You are left with nothing now, not the love of your life, not the person who loved you wholeheartedly, and not even the company. Thus, I believe I've achieved my goal of revenge upon you. She threw her laptop on the ground and began to scream. I had no regrets for my actions, just as she had none for hers towards me. I severed all ties with her and focused on my own healing process. Seeking revenge brought healing to my wounded heart. One day, Eva texted me asking to meet up. I ignored her message, but she persisted, claiming that I didn't love her if I didn't come. Eventually, she invited me to her office. The room was so dimly lit that I could barely make out a figure sitting in a chair by the window. I flicked on the light switch, illuminating the room. As soon as I saw her, I sensed that her remorse had intensified. I inquired about her sudden call, and she begged for an opportunity to make amends and rekindle our lost love. She also disclosed her wrongdoing. I now understand the gravity of my mistakes, she said. I comprehend the impact of my actions and the pain I've caused you. I handed her the box containing her possessions and informed her that our relationship was officially over. The emptiness you feel in my absence will serve as a constant reminder of the love you've lost and the harm you've caused. I explained the severity of her actions finally dawned on her, and she was overwhelmed with regret and sorrow. As the weight of her guilt became unbearable, she fell to her knees and wept uncontrollably. For several months, she attempted to approach me and talk things through. Unfortunately, real life doesn't offer any do-overs, and Eva was forced to face the consequences of her actions. After some time had passed, I was leaving a restaurant with my fiancée when I spotted Eva standing by the valet waiting for her car. She seemed visibly distressed, and when our gaze met, she looked as though she was on the verge of approaching me. Instead, I held my girlfriend's hand and walked away. This encounter made me realize that I had genuinely moved on, but it did not imply that I was willing to give Eva a chance to make things